welcome to tonight's episode of the Group Therapy Podcast. Tonight we have John Oak Dalton, independent movie maker, writer. I looked at your IMDb page. You are prolific in your work. You put out a lot of stuff. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I am from Muncie, Indiana. I went to Ball State University and studied film. My first paying scholarship at Ball State, and won one of those. It was so long ago that back then they gave you tickets to the Letterman show when you won the scholarship. And my wife and I drove to New York City in 1988 and I saw Isaiah Thomas on the show, and the musical guest was Terrence Trent D'Arby. So that tells you how long ago that was on the air. I was always interested in screenwriting and playwriting, and for a long time I worked in television. After that, when I graduated college in '88, I worked in television and broadcasting and educational media. I sold my first real screenplay in 1999. I was helping a friend, an Indiana filmmaker named Ivan Rogers, who's since passed away, but I helped him with a movie he was working on. I was actually doing some editing on it. He had shot it on 16 millimeter. This is kind of technical, but he transferred it to VHS tape with open edge numbers, and I helped him do tape deck editing after hours at the job I was at the time. I'm not there anymore, so it doesn't matter if I say I was working after hours using the equipment. But I helped him do all this tape editing and got a credit on the movie. It's called Forgive Me, Father. It's a heartwarming tale of a hitman who repents and becomes a priest, but then somebody kills his brother, becomes a hitman again. You know, it's one of those kind of things. And Ivan stars in it. And when that was done, we were going to settle up. I have an assistant editor credit on it. And I said, I don't think there's going to be a lot more movies shot in Indiana. This was in the late 80s, but I said, but I think I could write a screenplay from anywhere. So will you help me shop some screenplays? And he was good to his word and helped me shop some scripts around. In the late 90s, I sold one called Player in the Game, and it was in all the trades and Hollywood Reporter and Variety, that I had sold a screenplay. It was going to be produced, and Ray Don Chong, this is 90s stuff now. Ray Don Chong was maybe going to be in it. It was that kind of thing. So I had decided when this was in development that I would write 100 letters to directors and producers and production companies and say, hey, if you'll see this week's trades, Variety and Hollywood Reporter, I've got a movie in development. I'm looking for representation, da-da-da-da. So I literally wrote 100 letters, and I got this idea from, I was looking at the book up here, John Kennedy Toole, when he wrote Confederacy of Dunces, he had decided he would write 100 letters to try to get the book published. Now, what he decided was if he didn't get any responses, he was going to kill himself, which is what he did, unfortunately, because that book became one of the great classic novels of the 20th century. But so my goal was to do like John Kennedy Toole, except for the end game. But my part really was I was going to write 100 letters like he did. So I had a screenplay in development and it was in the trades, and I wrote 100 letters and only got one response. And it was kind of funny because I had a student, I was working at Ball State University at the time in educational media. And I had a student that had these videos, and he was like, you ought to look at some of these movies. And it was from a guy named Mark Polonia, who I didn't know about at the time, the Polonia brothers, who were, very, very well-known direct-to-video directors. They had made the first movie ever shot on Super VHS that was picked up by Blockbuster, and that was Feeders. Well, I had no idea, but this student of mine really liked these guys. Hey, you got to watch a couple of these movies. So I watched them, and I thought, there's something about this that's interesting. And so I wrote this guy a letter. I found out he worked at a college like I did. So actually, I think I actually sent him an email. I found his email address. This is in the early days of email in like the late 90s. He was the only person that wrote me back. And he was in this direct-to-video world, which I didn't really know much about, but it was really taken off in the late 90s. All the mom and pop video stores needing content and all that. So we messed around with a couple of things, and finally a Bigfoot movie called Among Us, he and I worked on together, and I went to Pennsylvania where it was shot, and helped, you know, because I was a TV guy. So I went out and helped. And while I was out on the set, the distributor called and said, hey, we need 3 more movies. And Mark Polonia turned to me and was like, hey, can you write 3 movies for us this year? And I didn't think I could write movies that fast at the time. Now, flash forward 20 years and I wrote 3 in 6 weeks for Mark. But back then I didn't think I could write 3 in 1 year. I was like, I don't know about that. But so I took 2 movies and rewrote over them that John Polonia had written. And then I wrote one brand new. And those movies were Peter Rottentail, which has been rated one of the worst horror movies of all time at places like Nerdly and Fangoria, which means it's been seen by everybody. And then Razor Teeth, I rewrote, and nobody has seen it or cares about it. And it's actually better to have the first thing happen. And then I did one myself called Demons on a Dead End Street, which ended up not getting made. So that's like the perfect like capsule of working in the B movie world. One that everybody hates, one that nobody saw, and one that doesn't get made. But the one that everybody hates, people see. You know, people have watched that movie for years and years, especially around Easter. So so after that, I was off to the races. So now it's like early 2000s, and the direct-to-DVD world is booming. So I did that for a long time, and come around about 17 or so. So maybe 7-8 years later, I was kind of in the place where I wasn't getting asked to do things I wanted to do, or wasn't getting offered much of anything. So that's when I decided I'd make my own movie. And I wrote a screenplay just for myself, and decided I would shoot it at my own house, where I'm at right now. And that I would just call in every favor I'd ever, made in the last 20 years. And a guy that we both know, Henrik Kuto, agreed to DP it for me. I'd written 4 or 5 movies for him, and he came over and gave me 5 days to shoot the movie. And he also produced it for me, really helped me kind of learn. I knew about TV directing, but I found out movies were a whole nother thing, and so I made a movie called The Girl in the Crawl Space. I shot most of it here at my house. I wrote it for myself and what my interests were. My plan was to sell it at card tables, at conventions and stuff like that, horror conventions. But a distributor picked it up, and nobody was more surprised than me when it was at Walmart and Family Video and all that. And then the same old question you always hear, okay, what are you working on next? Well, I hadn't been working on anything. I wanted to make a movie for myself. And so that very day that Henrik Kuto and I sent the deliverables to ITN for The Girl in the Crawl Space, I started working on Scarecrow County, and that was January of 18. And I shot it in March of 18. And then, no, wait a minute, of 19. Yeah, March of 19. Then in October of 19, it screened in Iowa City at a film festival. So from January of 19 to October of 19 was its entire gestation. And, we were going to start shooting another movie in March of 20, and then everything that happened, and who knows what's next. So that's the last 20 years in 10 minutes. So,
well, you talk about the direct-to-video market and the video stores and stuff. I was a manager at Hollywood Video back in the day. And I remember getting these movies that, and I loved them. And I would, anytime we get the new movies, I'd always get, the new ones, okay, we got Harry Potter in, we got the Fast and the Furious, we got this, and this. Ooh, okay, that's a new one I ain't seen before. And, they always end up, I took them home and I watched them, and I would always tell, because people knew to come to me when they wanted to watch horror movies. And I was the guy that would go like, yeah, this one, and don't watch that one.
That's interesting.
The one
that's funny because
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, the very last thing that I did, I feel like I did before coronavirus was, so Girl in the Crawl Space came out in February of 20.
Yeah.
And then Scarecrow County came out in October of 20. But so like February of 20, I went to Chicago for for work. And I knew I was up there Sunday, Monday, and I knew that Tuesday it was coming out in Family Video. So I actually got on the family video site and figured out, like, between Chicago and my home in Indiana, like there were 6 or 8 family video stores, kind of like going down to like Lafayette and then over towards Muncie and then on towards Newcastle, maybe 8 or 10. And I was like, well, why don't I stop at those on the way home? So I stopped at the ones in Indiana. Everyone I could find, it was like, hey, I directed this movie, Girl in the Crawl Space. I hope you pick it up. It was shot here in Indiana. And by and large, the people were very, very friendly. The managers and the people working there, you know, they were interested, because I knew that those are the people like yourself that someone say, hey, what should we watch tonight? You say, oh, this was shot in Indiana, you know, whatever. Some of them already had it there. You know, it was ready to go out the next day. This was on Monday. And then, you know, some people asked for a picture. I mean, it was really kind of cool. I think I signed a couple. It was just a neat experience. And then, of course, that was the very last thing I did before lockdown. So, but I'm not saying I ushered in the fall of family video or the beginning of coronavirus, but it definitely happened at the same time. So that's interesting, because I knew if I went and talked to people that they would recommend it to the people that worked at Hollywood Video, Family Video, and stuff, the people that would, you know, be talking to the customers and telling them things and getting recommendations.
Oh yeah. And it's fun because, you know, you knew your crowd. You know, to this day, I still know the ones, because I own a comic book store and I have a ton of DVDs. Matter of fact, I got Scarecrow Country and a bunch of other ones. I got that one sitting there because I got it in when our family video went out of business. And so when they were selling it all off, I went in there and bought a bunch of movies. Then on top of that, some of my customers went in and bought movies. So I end up with a ton of movies. So anytime I'm a sucker for Scarecrow movies. So as soon as I saw Scarecrow Country, I'm like, that's going in Paul's collection. And and at the time,
it's funny because like,
yeah,
like when so you know, Henrik is from a city. He's from Dayton.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Photography. And you know, I live way out in the country. I live on like 5 acres. I've got chickens. You know, if you see Girl in the Crawl Space, that is my house in that, and that's my property, my land, and everything. The shed that is in the kind of the third act of the movie, that's on my property and all that. I mean, I shot most of the movie here in just 2 weekends, and so Henrik stayed the weekends, both those weekends, with me. And actually, Aaron Ryan stayed here. John Hambrick stayed here. I mean, we had a fun time. It was a lot of work because we were shooting 20-page script days, but we had a lot of fun also. And anyway, and Joni Durian's in the movie. She drove back and forth. She had a infant at the time, or was an infant at the time. She's older now, but she was driving back and forth. But most of the people stayed here, and Eric Whiting stayed here. Henrik stayed here, my crew people. So it was a fun atmosphere. But I remember Henrik saying, you know, he wasn't used to really country life, and he was like, "This is kind of like." This reminds me of Dark Knight of the Scarecrow out here. And I'm like, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. And we got to talking about it, you know, and so between the 2 weekends of filming, I rented Dark Knight of the Scarecrow and watched it because I was curious I didn't remember it. It's a TV movie from the 70s. Yep. And so I was like, okay, I see what he sees about this. And so flash forward to when we were finishing Girl in the Crawl Space, the day we did the director's commentary, he and I did it together. We went out, walked Henrik's dogs around his neighborhood there in Dayton. And I was like, do you remember when you were talking about when you were shooting the movie, how it was like Dark Knight of the Scarecrow out there, you know, where I live and everything? And he was like, yeah. So, you know, I watched that movie, and if I were to do it today, I don't think I'd make it about a mentally disabled person. I think I would make it about a gay kid, you know, in the 80s. And, you know, he gets tormented and everything. And then, you know, same kind of thing. But if I was to redo it, that's how I would do it, because, you know, it just wasn't that open back then. And there were a lot of people that, you know, it just wasn't talked about as openly as it is now. So I think that would be a more relevant story for today, that, you know, some kids in the 80s beat up a gay kid, and then flash forward 20 years and you know, that kid is getting revenge, you know, and he said, you know what, you should write that. And so he and I started talking. We kind of talked through the whole plot while we were walking the dogs. Okay, I think I will go home and write that. That was it. Like I said, that was in January. And, 9 or 10 weeks later, we were shooting it. I think I wrote it in 3 weeks. I wrote it really quick. I mean, it was because it came so quickly, but that's how it started. And it's funny because I've had a lot of people since then say, they've just kind of got a thing for Scarecrow movies. And that's why they ended up watching it, just because they're interested in Scarecrow movies. So, but that was the genesis of it, was really Henrik thinking that where I live in rural Indiana looks like Dark Knight of the Scarecrow.
I could see that. I mean, I've got friends and family that live over in Indiana, and it's and I lived out.
We're not that far apart, actually.
Yeah, I lived out in the country here in not far from where I live now. It was 7 miles from one town to the other town. So literally my house was dead square in the middle. So it was like 7.25 miles to Sydney, and like 7 1/8 of a mile to Piqua. So I lived out in the middle of what I considered nowhere, because I was in high school at the time. And so it sucked when you're a high school kid. You have to travel no matter where you want to go. So you were talking about putting out these movies and being able to write it in what you said, like 6 to 10 weeks. Have you ever ran into this where you had an idea, you really put a lot of effort into a script, and then you're like maybe watching Netflix or Amazon or something like it, and all of a sudden you see something that's really, really super close to what you just worked on?
Yeah, I think it happens to everybody. Sure. And you always say, oh, that person beat me to the market, but I think there is, I think I wouldn't say there's a finite amount of ideas, but I think that people certainly do sometimes land on the same kinds of ideas. But yeah, that's happened to everybody I know that's ever worked on a screenplay. They start working on something and then they go, oh, that sure looks like what I was wanting to do. And sometimes if that, you get frustrated sometimes, because if they get to market before you and it's just too similar, you just really can't go that same way. You have to kind of think of something else. But yeah, I think that happens to everybody that writes or creates anything. There's always somebody out there, kind of thinking along those lines, or maybe have the same influences that you do. And so, yeah, that does happen for sure.
Yeah. This is my whole go-to thing is I had wrote a movie. I plan on shooting it in 2020. And when everything got put on hold, I just sat around my house like everybody else and was watching TV. And it was literally one of them ones where I'm on Amazon one night and I'm watching this trailer to a movie. And I'm like, oh, that's really, really, really close to my idea. And then I watched the movie and I'm like, okay, well, that's gone. So I scrapped 90% of it, rewrote it, and now it's buried around here somewhere because I've never gotten back to actually doing anything with it.
It's hard to get something started.
Yep. There we go.
I was saying that I'll give you a little space here. So I was literally a day from shooting my new movie, and it's been hard to get back to with COVID. I really empathize with what you're saying about not being able to get back to a project, because I thought maybe I'll start up in the fall, and then there was Delta, and then I thought maybe I could start in the spring, like in March when I shot my other 2 movies over spring break at my school I work at. But now we got Omicron, and that seems worse than Delta, so there's probably not a very good chance at all that I'm going to start a new movie in the next 6 or 8 weeks or pick my movie back up. But I think the good thing that happened was that I actually stopped. It was the night before. So I was going to take spring break off of work at the school I work at. And probably a few days before that, we'd found out that we were going to be closed for spring break and then 2 more weeks. And we'd be home for 3 weeks. And then that would be it. The coronavirus would be over. That's what we all thought.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, okay. So I went and scouted. We were shooting at almost all of it at a house, not my house this time. So I went to that guy's house and did a scout and took pictures. And I was home. I bought all of the groceries for the first weekend to make all the sandwiches and everything. And, everybody was coming in the next day. People were going to stay at my house again. I just started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, we can definitely shoot this weekend because we're just starting to close down. But what happens if next weekend, because I was shooting in 2 weekends again, what happens if we can't do next weekend? And that is what happened, because as you know, about a week into it, Ohio started closing down. Indiana was closing down. I mean, really closing down. And now we weren't coming back in 3 weeks. We were coming back maybe in a couple months. And then that couple months turned into 17 months for us that I was at home sitting right here like this. So I'm glad that we didn't start, because I would have had half of a movie that's not done instead of no movie. And it's better to have no movie than have spent the money and the time on half a movie, because now a year and a half's gone by. Some of these people, I mean, one of the women I cast has had a baby since then, and 1 or 2 have moved away. There's several things have happened to different people involved with the production. And then the house we were going to shoot at, I think I could go back there, but what if they had bought new furniture in the last year or painted a wall? So I'm just glad we didn't pick it up. But to be honest, I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about not starting another movie, because I don't know what we're going to be able to do, even B-movie level. I mean, obviously we've seen Hollywood movies that are stopping and starting, and people that can't finish movies right now all the talk show hosts that are canceling because they all have COVID. And I mean, so we're in that exact same boat in the B-movie world, trying to start movies, finish movies. I wrote a movie for Henrik that had some starts and stops, a movie that's coming out soon or will be done soon. And it was shot over a long period of time because of all the different restrictions. So yeah, I don't know. Now I have written a couple movies for other people since then, but I haven't started back on anything. And I'm not quite sure when I'm going to be able to do that with how things are going. It's hard to say.
Now, if you're like me, I had to find other outlets.
Yeah.
I jumped back into this. Me and my son kind of started doing where we would just talk about movies and stuff like that. And then it sort of kept evolving. Then my son, when I first started this, I lived in a completely different town. I lived in a completely different, house. My kids lived with me still. And now I'm in the point where I live in Piqua instead of Troy. I live in a bigger house. My 2 sons have moved out into their own house now.
Sure.
So my son, who used to work with me on my show, he's got his own life, living with at his own house and stuff. So he doesn't want to have to come over here and work with me. So I started literally my first interview that I got back into doing this was I did Eric. He came in here and we did a shoot with him. And then on top of that, we had technical issues with the mic that we had went to crap midway through the show. So the audio is horrible. So it's always evolving. I had people trying to talk me into to using my time to I always joked around about being a horror host, and they were like, man, do it. And I was like, man, there's so many horror hosts. I want to do something different. So I started putting together and hosting Saturday morning cartoons. And
I've seen that on your YouTube page.
Yeah. And it's my and I found a really place that I like being, and I like doing that. Because I mean, there are so many horror hosts out there that I'm never going to compete with, the 1,000 great ones out there, and the 20,000 mediocre ones. I'm still, so I just have fun hosting cartoons and hanging out here in my house and doing it when I can. And literally I'll shoot an episode at midnight till 1 o'clock in the morning. So, and I'm here, and everybody else has to be on set. Nobody else has to do anything. I can film stuff with you. I don't have to see, that's what's nice too, is I admit I've got COVID right now. Maybe not right now, but I did on Friday. So I can still shoot this episode because I don't have to worry about infecting my guest. I don't have to worry about, doing any of that. So
Well, you're set up there, Paul. You got some nice swag back there. I see a couple long boxes. I see some good, see an at back there.
Oh, there's multiple AT-ATs over there.
There's some nice swag back there.
Yeah, that's my there's my arcade.
Okay. Nice gray cat.
Yeah, that's my wife's cat, Lucy. My cat is I don't know where she's at. She's hiding. So but you know, it's I don't know. I just like being able to do this. I have fun, and I would love to get back to writing. But you know, I'm like, I don't have time to do that. I've got other stuff because like I said, I even own my own comic shop, so that gets even harder because I do.
Oh my.
Yeah, I do my interview show. I do my cartoon show. Run my shop all week long. I have a 11-year-old with autism, and you know, I try to spend time with my wife and my kids and stuff whenever I can. So I am a busy guy.
Is your shop in Piqua?
Yeah. Yep. It's called Are You Game? It's I sell video games, toys, comics, all that fun stuff. So, but yeah. Now I get on a different tirade on my stuff. Gonna get back to you. Who are some of your influences? Who are some of the people that you've like looked at and go, I like what these people do, you know?
I think just in general, like, I think my influences, like in screenwriting, you know, I came up more in like the 70s and 60s as far as like the kind of movies. So a lot of the 80s, 90s in the horror genre, I missed a lot of that. I was already an adult in the late 80s. So I wasn't really, and was married and starting my own family. So kind of that era of horror film, I wasn't as familiar with at the time. So really my influence are really more like 70s and 60s film, which is a lot of what I was watching and also what I was studying, you know, in college. So I would say that's kind of my era of influence. I think especially I think when I started, how I learned to do screenwriting, and this is back, you know, in like the typewriter days, but you know, what I did is I went to the library and checked out some bound screenplays. Back then you could, you know, there really wasn't an internet. Mm-hmm. So you could check out bound screenplays from the campus library. And I picked movies that I liked at the time so I could read the scripts and kind of learn how they wrote the movies. And I think the first couple I took out Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It, Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Those were probably the first couple that I found that I took home and read because I'd seen the movies around that time period. So that's how I learned to I think I checked out The Player, which was written by Michael. I feel bad I'm drawing a blank on his name because later on I wrote something on my blog at the time about the screenplay for The Player, and he wrote me an email. So he must have had early Google alerts set up like people do now. Michael, I'll have to, shoot, I can't Google it. I'm on Zoom. But anyway, so, you know, that's how I learned. And that was I was really into independent film back then as well. And so, but, you know, as far as the horror movies I saw growing up, you know, like Christopher Lee Hammer movies, you know, Italian sword and sorcery movies like Hercules movies, you know, Japanese rubber monster movies. I was really interested in like those, you know, I like Tarkovsky, like his Soviet science fiction, like Stalker and Solaris and stuff. That's my kind of vibe. So as far as horror movies, that's the kind of stuff. In Indiana, you were talking about horror hosts. We had a guy named Terry here. Yep. That was on Indiana television. And I, you know, you would stay up late and watch his stuff. And that's where I saw a lot of those. Later, when I was more of a teenager and had cable, because Sammy Terry was on regular television, then Son of Svengoolie, which had a lot of old movies, but funnier. And then Commander USA on the USA Network, and he would have like Mexican wrestling movies, and he had more crazy kind of movies. So those are all the things I saw growing up. Kung Fu Theater on the USA Network, stuff like that. So my horror influences are really earlier. And that's kind of more how I write, I think. I'm not as familiar with.
Before I forget.
What's that?
Michael Tolkien.
Michael Tolkien.
Yeah, I guess.
And I was so nervous when he wrote me an email. I was, because I'd written this whole thing about the player, and he responded to what I said. And it was so nerve-wracking to me that I just wrote back, thank you. Or I was afraid to sort of start a conversation with him about it. But I do the opposite now. I'm not as like Michael Tolkien or anything, but like, if I see somebody talking about a movie I worked on online, I do exactly what Michael Tolkien did. I write to people and chat with them. It's different now because it's not just email. So I tweet to people, or, I put, especially Twitter, but also Instagram more likely. You don't see as much on Facebook if you're not friends with them. But, if strangers start talking about movies I've worked on, I often write to them or try to say something funny to them. Because I think a lot of times people don't realize that real people have done all these things. It's just a sort of nebulous idea that these people are making these movies, but they're not really people that might accidentally see what you wrote about them. So, and people will say all kinds of stuff until they realize you're listening, and then they're a little more circumspect. But so yeah, those were probably my influences. I would say like the first couple movies that really kind of blew my mind were, I think the first one was when I saw Night of the Living Dead at high school. They had a screening at my high school at night, like for a fundraiser or something. And I went, and it's the first time I'd seen it. So this is like 83, 84 maybe. And they showed it at the auditorium, and it was some sort of fundraiser or something. Why they picked that, I have no idea. Well, but I was thinking at the time, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's in public domain. You're right. Yep. That's a good point, actually. You've solved my childhood dilemma right there. But I remember seeing it thinking, you didn't know what was going to happen because, so there were no famous people in it. John Wayne wasn't going to come in at the end and he wasn't going to save everything. You just didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the first time I really got interested in independent movies. And then so not long after that, a local theater, a dollar theater, something showed Dawn of the Dead, which wasn't that old at the time. Mm-hmm. That was made in the late 70s. This is like the mid 80s. So it was like maybe a second run theater. I don't remember, but I went to see Dawn of the Dead. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't recognize the people. More outrageous things can happen. People can take chances because it's not a Hollywood movie and there's not Hollywood stars in it. So I think that's when I really, really got my interest in. Sorry, I ran over my computer cord. That's when I really got interested in independent film. But I was always kind of on the fringes of it. Like my brother and I were always into, independent bands and kind of that music scene. There was a venue in Muncie where I grew up where those kind of bands, traveled, college bands, things like that. And then, I was interested in zines, and I was interested in underground comics, with an X.
Yeah.
I was all that kind of stuff. And actually in both my movies that I made, I have a lot of references to zines and underground comics and, independent music. And I did that because I've always thought, well, if someone wants to see my movie, and you can see by looking at it that it's an independent horror movie. If you want to see my movie, you're probably interested in other things that I like Dungeons and Dragons plays a huge part. It's not called Dungeons and Dragons in the movie, but Dungeons and Dragons plays a big part in Girl in the Crawl Space. And, underground comics plays a big part in Scarecrow County, and so on. So yeah, those would probably be early influences. As far as just what I was seeing at the time, and what I got interested in, how I got interested in those things in the horror world.
You talk about checking out bound copies of screenplays. I used to do a comic book show over in Indianapolis I don't know, twice a month, maybe once a month, back in the early 90s into the, there used to be a guy there, and he would get, this is all pre, internet where you could find everything. So he would bring these screenplays, the working scripts and stuff like that for movies that either A, never got made, or, vastly different from what the original version was. Because I remember getting the one script that made me laugh, and I wish it would have got made, is Spaceballs 3, The Search for Spaceballs 2. And, literally, because, I don't want to be I always thought screenplays, reading them like a book is some dry reading, for me. And you're sitting there and I'm just laughing out loud at this script. And, being able to get stuff like that. And I don't think, especially now, like in a day and age where everything is, pull it up, boom, there's this, you can read it. And, you have to actually go search these things out. Like you're talking about going to your school and finding the bound versions of them. I was like, I don't think people understand that was a thing at one time that you had to.
And going to conventions to look for bootleg, I could say bootlegs.
Yeah.
Bootleg tapes of movies you couldn't find that didn't, you think now we've got like Severin, Vinegar Syndrome, places like that are putting out, they're restoring these movies. Well, beforehand, we were just getting VHS bootlegs that people had made either with, taping off of screen or off of a cable channel or wherever they found them. I mean, that was a big thing to go around and find these weird, unusual movies. Actually, we were talking before we started today. I mean, that's actually how I met Andy Kopp. I mean, I knew him through public access television. Yeah. But I had a couple conventions where he had a whole thing, Turkish Star Wars and all those movies that he had his side hustle doing all of that. So it is interesting. Yeah, it was a totally different world as far as, and you had to, you went to the movies or you waited till it came on TV, and that was about it, and until the mom and pop stores, which, there's really been 3. I sort of missed the first one, like in the mid 80s, but some of my friends, like the Polonia brothers, they were really there at the right time for the mom and pop store. And then that second wave in the 90s, early 2000s, which was that DVD boom, where there are all these stores just needing content and content and content. And then that up. And, for a long time, I was really kind of at wit's end because I was like, I couldn't see how streaming was going to be monetized for B movie, like the everyday guy. Because Netflix wasn't taking those movies, right? Hulu was not taking those movies. Amazon was up to a point, and then they cut the legs out from under everybody. And so what was really going to be, but since, in the last couple of years, like I've told a few people, like in the last year or so, like my entire career is on Tubi. And I didn't even know there was a Tubi in like a year or two. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, there's Shudder. Like everybody's in the Shudder, everybody's in the Tubi. There are these platforms that are kind of offshoots. They're in what I call the long tail, which is, you probably know this. There's like a zillion people that want to see the new X-Men movie, right? Yep. And then there's this many people that want to see, the Rock doing something. And then there's some people that they want to go back and watch 90s Sopranos. And then there's people that want to watch 70s Shaw Brothers. And then you keep going, and way out here in the long tail are these people that want to see B movies that are independent Midwest, regional films, whatever you want to call them. But they're a loyal group, right? So you got a zillion people way up here watching X-Men, and you go down and way out on this long tail is where a really strong a very narrow, strong fan base is. And that's one thing I found out over the years is that fan base is loyal. That independent horror fan base, they will be your ride and dies, ride or dies, they will be there for you through thick and thin. And so it's interesting. And that's what a lot of these Tubi, Shudder, a lot of these services now, they're in that long tail of interest. They're finding, look at Pluto, the channel Pluto. It's all narrow casting of genres and ideas. So there's a whole world of that long tail, and that's where a lot of my career has been. So a movie has to be 75 minutes longer. It's not a movie.
Yeah.
You have to make 5 minutes. And like, but the host, I think it's called, is not that long. It's 60 something. And then somebody said to me, but it's a piece of content. So it's kind of like people don't care now, they want a piece of content. And that was really kind of eye-opening to me, because now there's all these services like Shudder.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to get a better signal.
Were you able to see, could you get, I think you were just frozen. I thought you were just listening. So did you not get me at all, or?
I got part of it. Yeah. We'll go back to when you were talking about the Tubi, you were
okay.
Pluto. You were I got part of that, if you don't mind, I guess.
Gosh, I forget what you had said that I started talking about that. You had said we were talking about how you would go to conventions and get VHS tapes.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I don't think people now, let me start again. So I don't think people now realize that, it was so difficult to find that content back then that we were interested in. It was to go and search at conventions and meet people, and to find VHS rips or VHS tapes and DVD rips and all that. I mean, it's just a different world now with streaming content. And it surprised me because I didn't really see it coming. Like I was around when the mom and pop video boom started, but I wasn't part of it professionally, but I was around, and some of my friends, like Warner Brothers, really took advantage of that, but I was around in the late 90s when the DVD boom started, and they needed in the early 2000s, they needed so much content.
Oh yeah.
And the pipeline was just chugging and running, and Amazon was, but then they kind of cut the legs out from under everybody. So, but it wasn't really until all these channels like, Shudder and Tubi and all these little Roku narrow casting channels, when that took off, that's when I really saw that the content funnel was opening up again.
Oh yeah.
And I've joked with people for a long time that, like, I didn't even know there was a Tubi like 2 years ago. And now my entire career is on Tubi, which is really surprising to me. And I watch it all the time myself now. I look for stuff on there. I know Shudder is a big service for the horror movie community, but there's tons of others.
Oh yeah.
And I think the first time that it kind of blew my mind was when The Host came out, which was a movie shot on Zoom in England, kind of like this.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was talking about it and how scary it was. And I found out it was like 60 minutes, 65 minutes maybe. And I was like, but that's not a movie, right? A movie study, we've always been told movie 75 minutes. And somebody said to me, well, it's a piece of content. And that's when I thought, wow, it's just a piece of content. That's what people aren't looking for, movies or 30-minute shows. They just need content. And that's the first time I really, okay, this streaming thing is really turning into something. And there's a way for us in this industry, our industry, to monetize that.
Oh yeah. Well, it surprised me was up until, I don't know, a couple years ago, it was movies, TV shows, and now that's kind of disappeared. It's content. It's these guys are producing
yes, exactly.
content. I've talked to people who produce stuff from 4 or 5 minute little snippets to 2-hour long shows. And I'm like, okay, how do you decide whether, okay, today's the day I make a 2-minute thing? He goes, it doesn't matter. He goes, whenever I get a, idea in my head, I just do it. He goes, because it's content. They're going to watch it because they're already watching this other stuff I do. I'm like, okay. And, I've talked to other people who are other filmmakers and stuff like that. And they're like, we're putting out, okay, we could do a full movie. That's going to cost us $5,000. Excuse me. We can do a 15-minute, content and knock that out in an afternoon for $150 for food, and they're like, well, we make more money on that 15-minute content than we would on the 2-hour long movie, because one, no video store's picking it up anymore. Walmart doesn't carry anything hardly at all anymore. He goes, so, yeah, we can probably get picked up on Tubi or get picked up on Plex or something like that. But where the money is on YouTube or wherever in that 15 minutes or whatever that they decide to put out for next to nothing. So, and then,
yeah, that's a new model for sure. And it was really eye-opening to me because I came up in a traditional film and television model, and that is not, it's not of interest to people anymore. It doesn't matter.
No. Well, and now the other way, it's going the other way where, you're getting these companies jumping on old properties that have just been kind of languishing out there in the ether. And one of my favorite movies of all time is a little horror movie called Eyes of Fire. I have 2 VHS copies of that I've had for 30 some years. And finally, was it Vinegar Syndrome just released it. No, Severin just released the Blu-ray of it. And, I'm like, okay, well, I can retire these old VHS tapes. I mean, I got The Keep on VHS and on Laserdisc because you cannot get The Keep anywhere,
right?
But there's somebody I know at one point, The Keep was on Amazon. It was the really, really low quality version at one time of it looked like the VHS copy, but they did it and then that got taken down. But you with people jumping on the old properties, and then you got the people just producing content to be producing content. And there's something out there for everybody. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if there weren't people out there watching it. When I first started doing all this stuff, I thought, okay, me and my kids are going to do this. It was a podcast, and we got on YouTube, and then the YouTube took off on some of the stuff. Some of the episodes I do good numbers, other episodes I don't do as well. But I keep the podcast there because I have a handful of fans that listen because they're truck drivers. So, and it's yet again content. People are driving down the road and they want something to listen to, even if it's a 30-minute show or a 2-hour show. So I don't know. They seem to like it. So, but it is a weird model for me to wrap my head around, I guess. So I don't know. I don't know.
If you hiccup there for a second.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a weird concept for me to wrap my head around. I mean, I'm closing in on 50, and I grew up in the era of, TV shows, movies. You didn't have, 5-minute little snippet to enjoy on YouTube, and now you do, and that's, people have made entire careers of it. So,
it's interesting you talked about having a comic book store, because I really think like role-playing gaming, RPG gaming, comic books, and B movies, there's a lot of crossover and interest. Like if you go to any of those conventions, you see a lot of the same people.
Oh yeah. As my son sneaks up behind me here.
Oh, somebody's sneaking up on you.
Hey bud, what are you doing? Go upstairs, dude. Go be good. Sorry. But oh yeah. There's definitely a crossover. I've got
you go to the conventions, comic book conventions, gaming conventions, or film conventions, horror film conventions, you see a lot of the same people, a lot of the same vendors. There's a lot of crossover of interest, I think, in those fields. So that's interesting that you're kind of talking, you're talking about horror movies, you got your comic book store, plus you obviously collect a lot of stuff with gaming.
Oh yeah. I'm a huge gaming nerd.
Mm-hmm.
Been playing D&D since junior high. So
me too.
Was it 1985, I believe? Maybe. I think that's right.
Yeah, I'm not that much older than you, so yeah, I'm not that far ahead of you on that.
Yeah. It's but yeah, it being in this universe, I've been doing comic book shows as a business, working for either somebody else or for myself since about 1990. And it's funny because you say you see the same people. I joke around that we go over to the show over in Indianapolis, which used to be in Shadeland, and now it's I don't even know where it's at now, but you could almost set your watch by when certain people would come in and when they would leave, and who the other dealers were going to be and everything. And I went a decade between doing Indianapolis shows, and I just decided to do one out of the blue one day. And I'm sitting there, and pretty soon, the same people came in that I hadn't seen in 10 years around the same time of the day. I'm like, wow, this is it, are we that bigger creatures of habit? And then my wife's like, yes, you're all that bigger creatures.
Yes, I agree.
Yep. All right, here we go. This is the one I ask all the people I've worked, the directors and stuff like this. You could work in any other genre other than horror. What genre are you working in?
Oh, I'd make a Western easily. If there was an old West town nearby that I could go shoot at, I love Westerns, especially spaghetti Westerns. When I was in Italy one time, I made the pilgrimage to Cinecittà Studios where all those spaghetti Westerns were shot. And so I would, and I've written a couple Westerns for other people, but that's what I would do. I'd make an old fashioned spaghetti Western probably.
Cool. All right. Who are some of your favorite people to work with?
I think, Mark Polonia from the Polonia brothers. I think I don't think we've gotten enough distance on what they have accomplished in, shooting super VHS movies in the 80s that Blockbuster picked. I mean, and the sheer volume of work they've done, how it's permeated the consciousness, and these are two guys that, live as rural. Well, John has since passed away, but, live as rural as I do, in a very rural area, and, have been able to enter that national consciousness as filmmakers and, are truly, outside the mainstream. So, and Mark gave me my first break. So I've always been an admirer of his. Henrik Kuto is an immensely talented young dude that I actually met when he was in high school. Yeah. And I thought he was pretty talented back then. And, I think he's got, his stars continue to be on the rise. I wrote a movie with a guy a number of years ago named Christopher Sharp, who has since moved into the YouTube world and has been very successful. And I've always thought he was really ahead of his time with his work. And I would love if he would make another movie. He only made the one, has worked more in the other parts of the industry since then, but I would definitely work with him again. But those would be, my good friend, Ivan Rogers, who has also since passed away. He's a very interesting guy. And I never really got to see a project with him to completion. And I would have enjoyed, as a scriptwriter, I worked on a movie with him as an editor, but he was just a really fascinating. I mean, I could do a whole hour just talking about his life and I keep trying to convince people to look up his work, posthumously and just see what he was doing. Cause he's a fascinating person. Went to high school with Ken Foree, from Dawn of the Dead. He knows Fred Williamson really well, knew Fred Williamson. He just moved in some interesting circles and had an interesting life. He did these martial arts movies. He's just an interesting person. So, I think everybody I've worked with, by and large, I've been happy with, and some I've returned to time and again, I think Henrik and I, living close together, just an hour and a half apart, that's been a big boon to our relationship. But I just finished, those are just a couple people off the top of my head that I've known for a while, and some I've got to work with a little bit. and some a lot. And so, you know, you kind of find out it's a pretty close, you know, the B movie world. There's a lot of connections between people, you find out.
Oh yeah, it's a lot smaller than I ever imagined it to be. Because you know, when I first started hanging out with Andy at the public access channel in Tip City, I grew up watching Shock Theater with Dr. Creep, and then I found out that Andy was working with Dr. Creep. So while I was editing my show, while I was supposed to be in there editing my show, I would go in there, end up hanging out with Dr. Creep and Andy while they were working on their show, so not getting any work done on my show.
That's pretty cool, though.
Oh yeah, and then one day out of the blue, Andy's like, "Hey," he goes, "Do you want to be in a movie?" And I'm like, "Sure, when and where?" And he's like, "I need you here at this place down in Dayton," and literally out in the middle of nowhere. And that's when I met Henrik, and that's when I met Eric, and then it sort of just kind of snowballed from there. And then I remember Henrik giving me a message one time. He goes, "Hey, do you want to be in a movie?" And I'm like, "Sure." He goes, "I need somebody to stand in the background in the office." And I'm like, "Okay." So I ended up being an extra in Bulldog for Christmas because he asked for people all the time. Yeah. And the worst part about it is I'm supposed to be an office worker. I get all the way down to Dayton from Piqua, and I get all the way there. I get out of my car and I look around, and I had a dress shirt that I had set off to the side to take with me, and I had left it set in Piqua. So that's a 30-minute drive one way. And I'm like, and he just looked at me and goes, "Just stand in the background. You can be anything. Just you can be a janitor. I don't care. Just this." And then I met, you know, Aaron Ryan. I met some of the other people he worked with, and I met some of the other filmmakers here because I met them through Aaron. And then, you know, I started looking into you because, you know, you were friends with Henrik and Aaron, and you know, your name pops up on movies, and
yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I started looking more into that, and you know, and it's funny because it all started because I live 2 blocks away from a public access television station where I met Andy Kopp. So it just sort of it's just a small little area.
Yeah, it is. And I really enjoyed working with Erin. I really wrote that part in Girl in the Crawl Space for her. You know, and I think that's always a good way to get people interested. You're like, "Hey, I wrote this part for you." And I wrote, you know, the part that John played for him and the part that Joni played for her. And, you know, it's a good way to approach it. "Well, I really wrote this with you in mind. And would you come to my house for a couple of weekends?" But yeah, she's a super talented person. And I had written Calamity Jane's Revenge that she's in and thought she was really good in it. You know, Joni was in Scare Waves, the segment I wrote. John, I've seen in a ton. I don't think I'd ever written for John, but I'd seen him in a ton of things that Henrik had done. So it was neat to get a chance to sort of make those connections with that Dayton crew over there. It was funny because right before I started shooting Girl in the Crawl Space, Henrik was shooting Ouija Room, like right before. And Joni and John play brother and sister in it. And I remember saying, "Do you think it's going to be weird that they're going to be husband and wife in my movie?" He's like, "People aren't going to know, you know, that that's the same." Well, as it turned out in life, Ouija Room and Girl in the Crawl Space came out the same day.
Yeah, I remember that. It was at Walmart.
Movies also. And Joni, Aaron, and John are in both movies. So, and I think Rachel Rodolphi's in both movies. So just as funny that, you know, they were shots and just happened to come out. They shot not at the same time, but they came out the same day. So
yeah. Well, it's funny is that you talk about writing stuff for, I was like, when I wrote my movie, I wrote a part for Erin because I wanted her to be in it. If I made a movie, I always told her, I was like, if I make a movie, I want you to be in it. She's like, "Yep. Okay." So I wrote a part for her. And I think her part is the only part that did not change from the original incarnation to the final incarnation of the script. So yeah, Erin's such a good kid. I like that girl. She's got a lot of talent for, you know, and surprisingly, I mean,
Yeah, she's talented.
oh yeah. And I think that this area doesn't get the credit it deserves, because there's a lot of really good talent coming out of this area. And yeah,
Mhm.
you get the people who are like, oh, it's just B-rated, blah blah blah. I'm like, but these guys kill it even on a B-rated movie. It's not that they're doing it for the paycheck. It's not that they're, they're not Bruce Willis that got paid $3 million to show up for one day.
Mhm.
They're people doing it for the love of doing it, not for the paycheck. And I think you can really tell
I think
that.
people hope that, like, if they do this, if I do X, maybe it'll turn into Y, that'll maybe turn into Z. I think that's what happens is, you're trying to think, if I do this, can I leverage it into something else? And that's a good reason for doing something,
Mm-hmm.
And some people, you never know who's going to get on the rocket. I've told people for a long time, I knew these two dudes that were at University of Iowa. They did a couple little short horror movies, and I reviewed them on a website that I was reviewing films for. I thought they were good little films. And, those guys got on the rocket. They're Beck and Woods that wrote Quiet Place. I met those guys when they were in college at University of Iowa. There's this dude, he sent me a VHS movie that he had shot. It was called Ghosts of Hamilton Street. And, it was a nice little movie. And then he made another movie, a little short, that I screened at a festival that I was judging, a micro cinema, like a no budget film festival. It was in Rapid City, South Dakota. And I was out there, and this movie scared the pants off of everybody. And it was called Oculus, which he then later turned into a feature film. And that was Mike Flanagan. And, I got to talk. I mean, he sent a movie to my house. And now this dude is, making Stephen King movies for Netflix, but he was shooting stuff on VHS, back in the day, and, mailed me a movie to review. And I remember I found an old correspondence between the two of us when I got out of reviewing for this website. I remember him sending me an email. Hey, are you still reviewing? I've got a new movie called Absentia. And I was like, no, I'm out of the business, but good luck with your movie. Well, that was kind of what kicked it off for Mike Flanagan. So it's kind of crazy. I mean, you just never know who's going to get on the rocket. So, you look at John Hambrick, Joni Durian, Aaron, Ryan, Henrik Kuto. I mean, any of these folks, you just never know. Something could catch fire, and off they go. And I remember John McBride, who is in the 80s and 90s, really well-known B-movie actor, and also directed a couple kind of cult films. He told me one time, you really can't push other people's career ahead of you, because it's so hard to just keep your own going. But if you take off, you can pull people with you. You can't push anyone ahead of you, but you can pull people behind you. And I thought that was really, really good advice, because you just never know who lightning is going to strike. And if you have a good relationship, they might pull you along with them. I think if you look at Sam Raimi, right? He still has Bruce Campbell. He still has his brother, because you end up with a group of people you could trust.
Oh yeah.
You end up with people you can count on. And so when you hit the big time, you look around and look for those people. And that's what Sam Raimi's done, and tons of other people. Tarantino, I mean, tons of people have done that. They pull the people that they trust along with them. So, I mean, I thought that was really good advice. I mean, you can't push someone ahead of you, but you can certainly pull people with you. And, lightning strikes. I was talking to a friend the other day about Paget Brewster, who, is in, I think, Criminal Minds or CSI, some show I don't watch, but he was talking about her. I was like, yeah, I saw her in a micro cinema film that was shot in Chicago, and she was like a secret agent or something, like 20 years ago. Yeah, I mean, and the guy who was the janitor on Scrubs was in it too. So I mean, you just never know. I one time was at a film festival, and the guy screened the movie, and the two actresses in it, I didn't know who they were. And he and I went to lunch, and he was talking all about them, but I didn't know who they were. It's like, oh, that's nice. I didn't know they were going to be Lizzie Kaplan and Alison Brie later. So it's just interesting. You just never know. You just never know who's going to catch fire, who's going to take off. An old college classmate, he was older than me, who was the mascot at Ball State University, was Charlie Cardinal. That's Doug Jones, who's been Silver Surfer and all the Del Toro movies and all that. He was the mascot at the college, You just never know.
Well, the other day, speaking of Doug Jones, I'm rewatching CSI from the beginning, and I forgot he was just a random poker player in an episode of CSI. Mm-hmm. No makeup, no nothing, just Doug Jones. There he was playing poker.
You never know. There's this guy named Ezra Buzzington that is, the longest time, was the most famous person on IMDb. IMDb, you can look up cities and see who are the famous people from there. And he was the most famous person born in Muncie. And I was like 15. And then I got to like 9. And I'm like, am I ever going to knock off Ezra Buzzington, which I'm not, because a dog named like Rita the Hair Missile or something like that. Something the Hair Missile is now the most popular person ever born in Muncie, a dog actor. And so it's true. If you look at IMDb under like what cities people were born in, this dog is the most famous person. Ezra Buzzington's now below, and I'm way below now. So I actually wrote to Ezra Buzzington just to make a joke of it, that he got knocked off I was trying to knock him off, and then I got to knock a dog off. She's like, no, that's my high school classmate, Johnny, whatever his name is. So it is funny. Everybody comes from somewhere and has done, everybody's had their peanut butter days. Some of us stay in it for a lot longer than others, but you do it because you think something might happen,
Oh, yeah.
X might lead to Z.
See, I have no chance of ever becoming the most famous person from Piqua.
Who's ahead of you?
The Mills brothers are from Piqua. The guy that the movie The Last Full Measure is from Piqua. And the guy who created the 8-track tape is from Piqua.
Okay, you're never gonna make it there.
Never. I cannot beat the 8-track tape guy. No.
No, that guy's probably right up there. The other ones might fall, but the 8-track tape guy, that's gonna be on the sign coming into town one day.
But no, it's the only other thing was I found out that one of my favorite comic book artists is a guy named Patrick Zurcher, and he's now in Indiana.
Oh yeah.
But he's from Piqua. And nice. I had to find him. Finally found him on Twitter one day, and I was like, "Hey, are you really from Piqua, Ohio?" And he goes, "Yeah, born and bred." He goes, "I lived there until I think in the 6th grade." And he sent me pictures of where he used to go buy comics here in Piqua and all this stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't exist anymore. And I send him pictures of what it looks like now, and we communicate from time to time. So
that's cool. I mean, yep. That's how it works.
Oh yeah.
Well, Paul, is close to my bedtime. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up, and I do appreciate it. Maybe we can have you on again. You can tell us about.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
And stuff like that.
And I got to get over to Piqua.
Yep. Hey, you can come over sometime. I can put you at the shop. We do have a comic book show here in town. I'm trying to figure out when we're going to run it now. Because we're supposed to, the day I got the venue was the Friday before everything got shut down. I was going to announce the date and the venue on that Monday, and they're like, Monday at midnight, everything was getting shut down anyways. So I had to postpone everything again. So
I'd like to drive over for that for sure.
Yep.
I got a lot of stuff I like to look for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Paul.
What? Sorry.
Bye now.
Bye. Thanks for watching tonight's episode of the Group Therapy Podcast. We'd like to thank Mr. Oaks Dalton again for being on the show tonight. We do apologize for the quality today. we'll try to figure that out. I know the last 2 episodes have been kind of rough. I do apologize. I don't know why the internet has been so horrible to us lately. As always, the group therapy is brought to you by Are You Game, the best comic book collectible shop in all of Pickle, Ohio, located at 124 North Sunset Drive, Pickle, Ohio, 45356. And as always, you can watch me on my other show, Saturday Morning Serials, every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. And we hope to have more guests soon. I do apologize. My throat is kind of gone today, but we will be back, and I will see you next time for more Group Therapy Podcast. Take care.